When Victor signaled that I might have a chance to talk this afternoon, I was delighted, quickly accepted, and asked his staff if they would assemble for me a list of the likely attendees, broken down by age and sex. And as I look around, I see that exactly is what has transpired. Many of you have broken down by age and sex. In the short time that we have, I'll tell you a story about me, but it really is about something about Milford. I arrived at Einstein in 1962 and spent the first day, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., on orientation with my fellow interns who were just joining. The last 15 minutes of each hour, we were allowed to mix with one another to learn a bit about each other. And I became acutely anxious in learning that every one of the other interns had spent a full year, their last year in medical school, doing sub-internships. They were very qualified to become house officers. I spent all 4 years pretty much in a research lab, having done the minimum of clerkships. I think that's maybe why I was picked to be the outlier in this group of otherwise gifted clinicians. I was, as I say, acutely anxious about my limitations in clinical medicine when at 5 o'clock I went to the 6 East ward at Van Etten Hospital, and my resident, who the day before had just completed his internship, was waiting for me with the gentle terms, "Brenner, it's about time you showed up. Go into the first room next to the nurse's station where you'll see a patient in respiratory distress, initials NS. Norman Fleischer told me to do a circulation time." Anxious as I was, I dutifully performed the circulation time after instructing the patient as to what the bitterness taste endpoint would be. Press the button. It takes about 15 seconds for the normal circulation time to be perceived. After 2 or 3 seconds of the injection, I heard a gasp, but I was so concerned with getting the time right that I never looked up until 30 seconds later, when I did look up and found Mr. S. very dead. This was what we now call a serious adverse event. I did my futile best to pound on his barrel chest. The distance from the outer chest wall to his heart was about a meter. He didn't respond. I grabbed all the stuff I had, went back to the nurse's station, tearful and trembling, and I'm sure ashen. Fleischer never looked up from what he was reading, and he said, "What was it, Brenner?" And I said, "Prolonged." He said, "How prolonged?" And I said, 3 minutes and counting. He rushed to the bedside, confirmed the problem, proceeded with hysterical behavior to do the equivalent of what would today be a flash email. He called everyone he knew to tell them about my misfortune and that he was likely to now be burdened for the next 6 weeks with his clinical incompetence. This was my first day. Over the next 24 hours, I withstood the jeers and the chuckles of everyone who I came in contact with. But Milford Fulop reached out to me on that next afternoon, having heard of my misfortune, and said to me, "Barry, you know that very sick patients often will be subject to these serious adverse events. This is no reflection on your clinical skills. Irving, London, and I are very happy that you're here, and we're sure you're going to do well." Amazing how he knew, without taking my pulse, that that was the treatment I needed. And so it tided me over. The next number of months, weeks and months, went very well. And what you just heard about this mysterious flight that Milford would make, where he would not only know what was in the charts, but he would leave little notes. If the hematocrit had fallen from 40 to 20, he would say, might be time to do a stool guaiac. You know, deep, thoughtful comments trying to deal with obvious shortcomings in the record. To my amazement, I got some of those, but not many. More often, a little note saying that was an excellent admission note. Or, in addition to the sensible things you're planning, you might think of this or that. But they were warm, they were kind, they were gentle, and they were not at all what I was led to believe was the Milford style. Sure, he was biting and abrupt and arrogant and all of that. But it was never misdirected. It was only, you know, how he was there to say to us, I'm here to make you think. And if you did the thinking, you were fine. If you were a little short on that, he might say more is expected. But he did it with firm, fair style. When I was chief resident with Ed Hankin and Saul Moroff, and Saul is here, it didn't take three of us to run the projector. And it didn't take three of us to make the schedules. And I was fortunate Milford invited me to join him in his dog renal clearance laboratory, where I had already found myself gravitating toward nephrology. And the time I spent in that laboratory converted me from a young man who had a general and casual way of thinking about science to a much more rigorous, reproducible, infinitely concerned with detail kind of approach to science, so that you, by doing the same thing over and over again, you were ensured certain constancy in how to do the research. And I took the lessons from that, and it stood me very well in a career in nephrology that I've enjoyed. So, one more point I would like to make is that I left Einstein in 1966, 4 years after I arrived, and I had the good fortune to meet Chris and Milford on the boardwalk in Atlantic City, virtually yearly for the first 6 or 8 years, until the meetings moved, and then perhaps less often, but we had a chance to chat and commiserate, and invariably Milford knew what I was doing, what papers I had published, and when, in exactly 10 years after I left Einstein, I was appointed to the chair at Harvard, the Levine Chair, and I saw Milford just weeks before that, there was a parental nachas that came from him with the recognition, the appreciation, the notice of what that, I suppose, meant to him, but certainly it was because of him in large measure that I learned to imitate those qualities of what I hope was intellectual rigor, intellectual honesty, a broad, well-founded base of knowledge, all tempered by an ability to judge, sort, evaluate, and arrive at what we all know are the Solomonic decisions about how to approach patients and their families and their illnesses. So I took with all of this an enormous benefit of having had the quintessential mentor, a person who made an indelible imprint on my life at a very important stage in my career. Milford and Christine, I wish you both happiness, long life, good health, and don't retire. I agree with Irving.